Thank you, Kimberly. So, Bernie, you're sitting next to one of your great fans. In fact, there's quite a
who is
two.
clearly done a much better job of presenting than I will. I'm going to deal with this in a slightly different way of basically describing just the very first presentation briefly, and then going into what I thought were similarities and mainly what were almost hidden assumptions that were driving the other three speakers. So we started with Kenneth Nolan talking to us about, in a very gentlemanly and gentle way, about sort of getting it right and getting with the program. That it's time the U.S. Did get some sort of an approach that was meaningful, given all that had happened in Europe and all the excellent examples that we have. In fact, I could summarize, I can synthesize the entire rest of the presentations in two words, which is fix TSCA. I mean, that's basically what we heard from the other three speakers. It's but remember that's an important statement. All three. This is Wendy Cleveland-Hamnet from the EPA, Richard Dennison from Environmental Defense Fund, and Michael Walls from the American Chemistry Council. All three agree on the need to move something forward in legislation. And I found them pretty close in terms of the details. Now, what's going to happen in Congress, I won't even, maybe Lynn would like to hazard a guess on that, but I won't even try to get near there. But there were a couple of hidden assumptions, and not so hidden assumptions, that I thought were worth putting out in sort of a synthesis type of approach. One is the issue of toxicology testing, and that leads very much into what Hal Zennick's going to speak about in synthesizing the third session. You know, Lynn gave us figures about, as did Wendy, about 20,000 new chemicals that have come on board since TSCA developed. If you assume that, let's say, our toxicology is good enough that we could pick up 99% of the chemicals that are causing, say, reproductive and developmental effects before they get out, so that the industry doesn't develop them, EPA doesn't let them on board, that still leaves 1% not. That leaves 200 chemicals out there that presumably, in a quick arithmetic, are potential reproductive and developmental toxins that EPA has let through. And I don't think we're doing 99% effective. I think we've got a long way to go on that. And I picked reproductive and development. You can pick neurotoxin. You can pick the chronic disease issues. You can pick lots of the others. Well, is what REACH is doing, is what we're hearing that we want TSCA to do, the high production volume, is that a situation where we can fix it by not enough toxicology being done? We'll just fix that by doing more toxicology. We'll make sure we do toxicology and everything. Or is it that our tox tests aren't good enough? And in that type of an approach, we really need to come to grips with that. I think there's an enormous amount of assumptions. I think our fourth panel, a lot of people a lot of the presentation sort of automatically assumed that as long as we did the tox testing that we know how to do, we'll be fine. No, we won't be fine. And I was disappointed in REACH, and Ken just heard me say this not so, a couple of years ago, that in the billions of dollars that you've imposed, or billions of euros that you've imposed on industry, there really is not a major push within REACH to say, let's develop new testing. I know you believe that new testing is needed, but basically that disconnect is there, and I don't see it developing in TSCA either. I think that what we did hear about, that there really is an understanding of the need for new testing, and Hal will say more about it, or maybe might disagree, but I don't think that we really have a direct connection with the issue of how do you develop the Toxic Substance Control Act in a way that makes sure that we have the best testing rather than just saying, oh, you got to test everything. So that's something that, again, you can look at the different presentations by the three speakers and hear somewhat different approaches buried within it as to whether or not our tests are good enough. There was also somewhat of a difference on the issue of promoting innovation. What's the best way to promote innovation? Michael Walls, I thought, made a very good point about the fact that most innovation with chemicals is with existing chemicals, not with new chemicals. Is that true? Do we have data on that? What do we have about the issue of are thresholds the kind of things that promote innovation, or are they the kind of things that inhibit innovation? How big the threshold is that going to make a difference? Is the issue of the kind of testing that's required and putting chemicals in different levels, does that help innovation? Does that hurt innovation? I've had experience in the past with a situation under the Clean Air Act where the thresholds put in, and actually under TRI, more than the Clean Air Act, where thresholds put in basically permit one to go from a chemical that would get one to have to be regulated. So one example is a solvent that would exceed TRI reporting efforts, and that the company replaced it with a solvent that had a 1/10 the volatility, so it would not exceed the TRI reporting levels, but it had 1/100th the odor threshold. So everybody in the community was sure they were being made sick because on bad days they could smell this now. Was it toxic? I'm not sure whether it was or not, but it's an example of where we sometimes drive toward agents that may be more toxic. The hazardous air pollution component of the Clean Air Act amendments, which lists, 186, I think it is, chemicals that Congress says thou shalt regulate. You can argue that's precautionary. In other words, let's not wait for risk assessment to slowly get to do risk assessment each. But you can also argue that, gee, the reason that those 186 chemicals are on the list is because we've tested them and we know something about them. And maybe that's driven to substitution. That's a problem. So what we've heard in the last session were people very aware of that. But that wasn't really for the bulk chemical issues that are what the hazardous air pollutant portion of the Clean Air Act deals with. So are we able to design TSCA in a way that basically allows for innovation, allows for better things, and doesn't drive us toward chemicals that may be more of a problem? And again, how holistic you are to deal with all chemicals is important in that. So those are a couple of issues. We heard about transparency over and over again. We certainly heard about it in the TSCA discussions. Again, how do we come to grips with that? Sustainability has an element of transparency in just about every definition, whether it be Rio or the World Business Council and Sustainable Development, and yet those of you familiar with the Gulf know that there's the Gulf of Mexico, there was a major concern about a dispersant that had an element that was not going to be released to the public. This compound turns out to be this component turns out to be the major over-the-counter laxative sold in the United States. So from a toxicologist's point of view, I'm not worried about human health effects about that particular compound used in 1 million doses a day. I don't know what it does to fish. But
what about the fish poop?
yeah, well, that's what I said. You know, you've got that kind of problem as well. But seriously, what you've got is a situation where there was no reason for that. I mean, it would cost $10 of any of the competitors to find out what that chemical was. You scared people. We're doing the same thing now with the shale gas development. We're scaring people unnecessarily. We're contributing to psychosocial stress. And industry is basically demonstrating over and over again that they are unnecessarily putting in using confidential business information as a way to hide things that they shouldn't really hide. It's not in their best interest to do so. How do you craft something which protects the importance of innovation by having secrecy? Secrecy is an important part of whether or not a company is going to invest in innovative approaches. How do you make that distinction? And we didn't really quite hear how to go about doing it. Well, we heard different views as to the value of CBI. Finally, global We didn't at all talk about the global issues. The UN Environmental Program had, coming out of Rio, did an emerging issues workshop on the fact that the perception is that a lot of the bulk chemical industry is now moving to developing countries, not the BRICS, not China and Brazil and whatnot, but to other countries. And these countries do not have the infrastructure to deal with it. And that's an issue on chemical governance, which we have to keep in mind.
Thank you, Bernie. Moving on to session 4, dealing with prioritization for risk assessment and related issues. Dr. Zenik, the floor is yours.